Hello everyone, Professor Kurzlock here. So when Chinese President Xi Jinping met with US President Donald Trump in Beijing this past week, he used a phrase that garnered a fair amount of media attention, the Thucydides Trap. So this morning I was watching some news and reading some news, and this term kept coming up, and a few pundits joked around that across the country people were Googling this morning what was the Thucydides Trap. So I figured I'd make just a brief video talking about what the Thucydides Trap is, something that we learn about in international relations, something that comes up in our IR courses, and so I figured it would be worthwhile making a video today. So Thucydides was an ancient Greek historian who wrote about the Peloponnesian War, the conflict between Athens and Sparta in the 5th century BCE. His most famous argument, and one that is reappearing in the news today, was that war became likely because the rise of Athens and the fear of that rise created in Sparta. So in other words, it was the deeper shift in power. So a rising state was becoming stronger, and the established power became increasingly afraid of losing its position in the world. So with Trump and Xi meeting, we can understand why the Thucydides Trap is once again in the news. So this is why Xi's comments matter, and why when Xi made these comments, they're receiving international attention. Trump gave a follow-up tweet where he tried to clarify what he thought Xi meant. But according to China's official account of the meeting, Xi asked whether China and the United States could overcome the Thucydides Trap and create a new model of major power relations. So let's just step back for a minute and think about and talk about what the Thucydides Trap actually says. So we know, coming from Sparta and Athens, so the basic idea of the it's tough to say over and over, the Thucydides Trap is when a rising power begins to challenge an established power, both sides may become more insecure. So here we can think of it as a rising China versus a US, which is a consolidated hegemon over the past 30 years. So a rising power begins to challenge an established power. So the rising power, understandably, wants more influence, more recognition, and more room to operate on the global sphere. The established power, meanwhile, fears decline, loss of status, and the weakening of its alliances or institutions. Neither side may actually want war, but each side's efforts to protect itself can look threatening to the other side. Remember, in a previous video, I talked about the security dilemma. I'll make a separate video just about the security dilemma. But here we can see with the Thucydides Trap, where the rising power and the consolidated power start to fear each other's maneuvers. And thus, this is the trap. China sees itself as a major power returning to its rightful place in world politics. The United States sees itself as the central power in the post-World War II international order, with deep alliances, global military reach, and a long-standing role in shaping the roles of the international system. So the problem is not thus simply that China is getting stronger. The problem is that China's rise changes the environment in which the United States operates. In American efforts to preserve that position of power, that environmental position, is in conflict with a rising China. So this is why these Thucydides Trap is often discussed when U.S.-China relations are being discussed. That's why this came out of the Xi-Trump meeting. Graham Allison popularized this concept in his book Destined for War, where he argues that the rise of China in the position of the United States creates one of the central strategic problems of the 21st century. Allison's book, Destined for War, it's a good book. If you take upper division international relations courses, you might read pieces of it. I don't think I read it front to back until graduate school, but you've probably read chapters of it. It is really an important piece of scholarship. The Harvard Thucydides Trap project actually identifies 16 historical cases in which a rising power threatened to displace a rolling power, and the Allison argues and the Center argues that 12 of those 16 cases ended in war. So that number, of course, has been debated. The framework has its critics, but the broader warning is still important. Power transitions are dangerous, and Taiwan is really where the Thucydides Trap becomes more than just a theory, and it becomes a real-world crisis scenario, which if you were following the Xi and Trump meeting over the weekend, you know and you saw discussions about Taiwan. Xi reportedly asked Trump about how the U.S. would respond. This is really where that flashpoint could occur at. For China, Taiwan is a core sovereignty issue. The Chinese Communist Party views Taiwan as part of China and treats reunification as central to national identity and regime legitimacy. For Washington, for the Trump administration and previous administrations, Taiwan is tied to regional stability, credibility, democratic partnership, military balance, and importantly, part of a broader U.S. position in the Indo-Pacific. The United States does not formally recognize Taiwan as an independent country, but it remains Taiwan's most important security partner and arms supplier. Again, this point came up in the Xi-Trump meeting, where Xi reportedly asked Trump if he's going to continue to supply armaments to the Taiwanese. So Reuters reported that Trump said Taiwan arms sales did come up extensively. Xi asked point blank if the United States would defend Taiwan if China attacked. So here, and this is exactly why Taiwan, and the issue of Taiwan, is viewed as a flashpoint in the Thucydides Trap. It is not just a territorial dispute, it is a collision between Chinese nationalism, American credibility, alliance politics, military deterrence, and the regional balance of power. Each side sees the stakes as extremely high. Each side worries that backing down could invite more pressure later. And each side also worries that the other side might misread caution as weakness. So while the Thucydides Trap is being talked about in the media, maybe some people have heard of it, maybe others learned about it in school, or maybe it's a new concept to others. So the main takeaway is we can think about a situation, again, where we have a rising power here, which would be China, in a consolidated hegemon, which would be the United States. The idea that you have this rising power and maybe a declining or stagnant power are bound to have a conflict with each other as the dynamics of international power change. Okay, thank you for watching.